What if one of the greatest cartoon friendships never existed? SpongeBob SquarePants and Patrick Star are inseparable. From jellyfishing to blowing bubbles, their adventures have defined not only the heart of Bikini Bottom, but an entire generation's idea of friendship. They're goofy, loyal, and sometimes clueless, but always there for each other. But what if they never met? What if SpongeBob moved into that pineapple under the sea and never walked across the street to meet the pink starfish under the rock? In this alternate reality, we'll dive deep into what Bikini Bottom might have looked like without their iconic bond. No shared laughs, no ridiculous plans, and no epic duets of best friends forever. Just two sea creatures living their own separate lives. From how SpongeBob might have grown without Patrick, to what Patrick's lonely world could have become, and even how characters like Squidward or Sandy would fill the void, this version of the story changes everything. Let's take a trip into a universe where the biggest what if in SpongeBob history comes true. What if SpongeBob never met Patrick? When SpongeBob SquarePants moved into his pineapple house at the edge of Conch Street, he was full of hope. With his spatula packed and a smile on his face, he was ready to start a new life in Bikini Bottom. He had dreams of flipping Krabby Patties, jellyfishing on weekends, and making lots of new friends. But something changed before it even began. He never met Patrick Star. The rock across the street sat silent. Patrick, the pink starfish who in some other version of reality might have become SpongeBob's best friend, simply remained a neighbor he never got to know. They never crossed paths, never said more than a polite hi in passing. And with that, an entire chapter of SpongeBob's life was never written. Instead, SpongeBob's world became smaller, not sad exactly, but quieter, focused, tidy. He got the job at the Krusty Krab, just like in every other version of his story. He still loved cooking and took pride in every Krabby Patty he made. But with no Patrick pulling him away for bubble-blowing contests or jellyfish expeditions, SpongeBob became consumed by his work. He was the perfect employee, never late, never distracted, never causing a scene. Mr. Krabs trusted him with everything from training new hires to locking up the cash register at night. To his co-workers, SpongeBob was cheerful and dependable, but behind that ever-present smile, he kept to himself more than people realized. Jellyfishing, once his favorite hobby, became something he did out of routine rather than joy. He'd head to jellyfish fields alone, net in hand, but the afternoons weren't filled with laughter. There were no races, no stings taken as badges of honor, no one to yell, "Got one!" from across the field. It was quiet, peaceful, maybe too peaceful. Back home, SpongeBob's evenings were filled with cleaning, organizing, and writing in a personal log he kept under his bed. His house was spotless. He alphabetized his record collection, labeled every kitchen drawer, and once spent a full weekend color-coding his socks. The chaos that defined so much of his original life, the spur-of-the-moment games, the random explosions of fun, never arrived. He still tried to connect with others. Sandy Cheeks, the squirrel scientist from Texas, became a regular figure in his life. They practiced karate together, conducted little science experiments, and even entered a sandcastle competition once. But while they got along well, Sandy was always focused on her goals, always a bit more serious. Their friendship had structure, limits, rules. SpongeBob missed the kind of friendship that didn't need rules. He just didn't know it. Every now and then, he reached out to Squidward. Without Patrick around to double the chaos, Squidward tolerated SpongeBob's presence more easily. They'd sometimes eat lunch together at the Krusty Krab, mostly in silence. Occasionally, Squidward would play clarinet and SpongeBob would clap politely. It wasn't much, but it was something. The truth is, SpongeBob became respected in this version of Bikini Bottom. Reliable, responsible, the kind of person others nodded to at work, even if they didn't know much about him. He won Employee of the Month a record number of times. He was featured in the Bikini Bottom Business Bulletin for outstanding fry cook achievement. He even gave a speech once at the boating school about workplace discipline. But with all those accomplishments, something was missing, though no one could quite put their finger on what. There were no wacky inventions gone wrong, no jellyfish kings crowned by accident, no spontaneous musical numbers or invisible boatmobiles crashing into coral reefs. SpongeBob still laughed, but it wasn't the rolling, contagious laugh that came from sharing something completely stupid with someone who didn't judge you for it. It was the kind of laugh you give when something's mildly amusing, safe, measured, polite. And because he never met Patrick, SpongeBob never truly let go, never allowed himself to just be unfiltered and weird and wild. There was always a layer of control, a pause before he acted, a question of "is this appropriate?" that echoed in the back of his mind. And no one ever told him it was okay not to care. That's what Patrick would have done. That's what a best friend does. But in this world, that best friend never knocked on the door, never shouted from across the street, never joined him on the couch with a dripping ice cream cone and a ridiculous idea. And so, SpongeBob kept moving forward. He was liked, he was productive, he was even proud of what he'd built. But the version of himself that might have come alive, the SpongeBob who wore jellyfish stings like war medals, who turned a cardboard box into a portal to adventure, who laughed until he cried with someone who understood him, never showed up. Because he never had someone to bring that side out. He never had Patrick. And in this timeline, he never even knew what he was missing. Patrick Star lived under a rock on Conch Street, literally, and in this version of Bikini Bottom, that's exactly where he stayed. He was there when SpongeBob moved into the pineapple house across the road. He saw the moving van, heard the furniture being dragged inside, even watched the lights turn on late into the night as SpongeBob unpacked. But Patrick never went over, never said hello, never introduced himself. In this version of the world, their paths never crossed, not in any meaningful way. And so Patrick lived his life alone. He slept in late every day, sometimes not even remembering whether it was morning or afternoon. Meals were whatever he could scavenge, mostly ice cream, leftover chips, and things he found floating through the water that looked edible. He didn't cook, he didn't clean. He barely moved from the same sunken spot on his sandy mattress unless he had to. Most days, Patrick didn't speak to anyone at all. He'd go for days without leaving the rock, not because he was hiding or scared, just because he didn't see a reason to go. Bikini Bottom moved around him, but he was like a pebble in the current, still slow, untouched. When he did go out, it was usually for food or a random impulse. He'd wander to the grocery store, stare blankly at the aisles, forget what he came for, and leave with a single melon or a magazine about coral reefs. The clerk at the counter knew his name, but never asked how he was. He always seemed fine. A little odd, a little spacey, but fine. There were attempts, small ones, to connect with others. He once waved to Sandy from across the park. She waved back, smiled politely, and went back to sketching her latest invention. He tried saying hi to Squidward once, too. Squidward grunted and closed his blinds. After that, Patrick stopped trying. He spent hours lying on his back, staring up at the water above. Sometimes he made shapes out of passing clouds of jellyfish. Sometimes he'd start talking to a rock or a piece of coral like it was alive, then forget halfway through the conversation and fall asleep mid-sentence. Patrick didn't think of himself as lonely. He didn't really think about it at all. But there were moments, quiet, odd moments, when something felt off. Like when he found a pair of sunglasses in the sand and instinctively held them up to another face that wasn't there. Or when he saw two kids laughing over a spilled ice cream cone and didn't understand why it made his chest feel weird. He once tried to strike up a friendship with Plankton. It lasted 3 days. Plankton was too intense, too angry, too laser focused. Patrick was slow to respond, forgot conversations midway, and accidentally sat on a laser cannon. Plankton called him a liability and stormed off. Patrick shrugged, then forgot it even happened. Without SpongeBob, Patrick never had someone to believe in him. No one ever said, "That's a great idea," when he suggested building a sandcastle with a moat full of pickle juice. No one ever invited him on an adventure or celebrated his strange way of thinking. There was no one to laugh with him when he said something nonsensical, or better yet, to laugh without even knowing what they were laughing about. And without that kind of support, Patrick never grew. He remained what many in town assumed him to be: lazy, simple background noise. But in another world, the Patrick Star they never saw was full of wonder. He had a childlike imagination, an untapped curiosity, and a gift for finding joy in the dumbest things. But only one person ever saw that side of him. Only one person ever brought it out. And in this world, that person never came. So Patrick stayed under his rock. Days bled into nights, and nights into weeks. He watched TV, napped in the sun, ate whatever was easy, and occasionally mumbled jokes to no one in particular. And the truth is, he didn't know any different. He never missed SpongeBob because he never met him. For Squidward Tentacles, life on Conch Street was as calm and orderly as he always preferred. Each morning he woke up at precisely 7 a.m. He brewed a cup of kelp coffee, practiced his clarinet for 45 minutes, and sat down for a light breakfast while reading the Daily Coral. His neighbor SpongeBob, who lived in the pineapple house next door, was cheerful but never intrusive. SpongeBob went to work early, returned home quietly, and rarely made a scene. Across the street, Patrick Star lived under his rock. He mostly kept to himself. himself. He didn't say much, and Squidward never bothered to ask why. The three of them existed in the same neighborhood, but barely acknowledged one another, and that was just fine with Squidward. At the Krusty Krab, work was predictable. SpongeBob ran the kitchen like a well-oiled machine. There were no sudden explosions of music, no interruptions in the flow of customers, and certainly no nonsense during Squidward's shift at the register. Mr. Krabs was pleased. Business was steady. Everyone played their part. Squidward's afternoons were his sanctuary. He'd return home, light a scented coral candle, and spend hours painting abstract seascapes or composing avant-garde clarinet solos. Occasionally, he would perform at the Bikini Bottom Recreation Center. Attendance was usually low, but that suited him. He preferred the company of silence and subtle appreciation. No loud laughter echoed through the neighborhood. No footprints dirtied his freshly cleaned walkway. His windows stayed intact, his mailbox untouched. This was the life Squidward had always envisioned for himself. Quiet, predictable, controlled. He had little interest in the lives of his neighbors. SpongeBob was overly enthusiastic, yes, but harmless. Patrick was simply there, another background character in Squidward's perfectly curated routine. He never questioned why the two had never become close. It didn't seem odd. Not everyone was meant to connect. Some people, or sea creatures, just pass each other by. Bikini Bottom, as far as Squidward was concerned, was in perfect balance. He had his routines, his music, his solitude. He didn't host parties. He didn't join community events. He didn't care to socialize beyond what was required, and he liked it that way. There was no chaos to reflect on, no past annoyance to chuckle at, no sense that things could have been different. They weren't. This was life as it had always been, quiet, uneventful, and comfortably Squidward. In Bikini Bottom, everything runs smoothly. SpongeBob wakes up early every morning, whistles on his way to work, and cooks with unmatched passion at the Krusty Krab. Patrick spends most of his time lounging under his rock, watching the clouds drift by underwater. Squidward paints. Sandy experiments. Life moves forward, steady and predictable. On the surface, nothing seems wrong. No one's unhappy. No one complains. The city is peaceful, efficient, even quiet. But over time, that quiet started to define everything. The days in Bikini Bottom feel light. Light on noise, light on excitement, light on heart. There are no jellyfishing races down jellyfish fields, no ridiculous bubble-blowing championships that end in sea monster chases, no midnight runs to Goofy Goobers for ice cream, or wild parades with no reason at all. SpongeBob still smiles, yes, but the laughter that used to echo through Conch Street never really started. In this world, SpongeBob never knew what it felt like to have someone who matched his silliness. Patrick never found the one person who accepted his weirdness completely, and no one else, not Sandy, not Squidward, not even Gary, ever filled that particular space. Without Patrick, SpongeBob matured faster. He became more focused, more responsible, but also more restrained. He learned to entertain himself, to keep his imagination tucked inside like a folded napkin. His days were filled with structure, not surprises, accomplishment, not adventure. And Patrick, he remained as he always was, simple, slow, a little confused, but ultimately unchanged, because no one was there to pull him out of that comfort zone. No one ever said, "Come on, let's go," and dragged him headfirst into nonsense. He never became more than a background character in his own neighborhood. Even Bikini Bottom itself felt different. Without the duo's antics, the town ran with a kind of mechanical calm. The Krusty Krab became a place of order, not oddity. Boating school was uneventful. Downtown was quiet. Sure, things still happened, but none of them were outrageous, unforgettable, or completely off the wall. The kind of moments that usually make life feel magical just never arrived. Because friendship, the real kind, the messy kind, the "I'll do anything for you even if it's dumb" kind, has a way of setting things on fire in the best possible way. SpongeBob and Patrick were never just funny. They were proof that two completely different people could find a perfect, ridiculous balance. That a fry cook and an unemployed starfish could create a world of their own, full of games, music, and pink and yellow chaos. Together, they made the ordinary feel like a festival. But in this timeline, that never happened. Instead, everyone just became who they were supposed to be, safe, self-contained, neatly folded into their roles. It's not a bad world, it works. The days pass, the sea flows, but without that spark, without that one simple meeting that never happened, Bikini Bottom became something else. Predictable, organized. It's not that things went wrong, it's just that the thing that made everything go wonderfully wrong never showed up, and no one even realized what they missed. If you enjoyed this expanded look at what if SpongeBob never met Patrick, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more what if scenarios. Let us know what other SpongeBob questions you'd like us to explore next.